I read about the story in the book by Nandor Fodor, he published in the 50s. He was the ghost hunter who investigated the case, and it took him 20 years to get his book published. I found it amazing that this poltergeist attack had taken place in London, in Croydon, in 1938, shortly before the war, and I decided to try to find out more about it.
One of the things about Kate Summerscale as a writer, and it's particularly evident in The Haunting of Alma Fielding, is she's not a showy writer. She's not trying to pull off exciting effects all the time. And yet the dexterity required of her, specifically as a prose writer and as evoker of atmosphere and creator of character, in order to put all these strands together, is just remarkable. So I think the thing that really stands out about this book, which people most enjoy, is just the virtuosity of someone who now, after 5 books, is just a complete, master of what she does.
The Haunting of Alma Fielding is an electrifying story, and what it's asking is so many fascinating questions about women, about the onset of war, about Europe in the 1930s, and also about the question of a self.
Well, Nandor Fodor, the ghost hunter who investigated Alma's case, was fascinated by psychoanalysis, and in the course of his investigation he started to wonder whether the poltergeist events might actually be caused, in line with Freudian theory, by repressed traumas, subconscious shocks that were emanating as physical forces in the world. And by the end of 1938, he'd actually come to Freud's house and met him, amazingly, because Freud he fled to London that summer, and because of the Nazi invasion of Austria.
The first thing you think when you read a Kate Summerscale book, and I think it's especially true of The Haunting of Alma Fielding, is how on earth did she construct this book? She hadn't expected to find the material that she did find on Nandor Fodor, who was the kind of chief ghost hunter of the Institute of Psychical Research. And so I suppose, though Kate Summerscale doesn't really foreground herself, she's not really a kind of very present narrator. There's an epilogue and a prologue where she's going to Cambridge to do research, and she engages with a taxi driver who clearly believes in extrasensory perception and poltergeists and things like that. But otherwise, you have to look at the acknowledgements and you have to look at the sources to kind of do your own kind of detective work on how this book came about. So as a piece of research, and there are a number of books that we read that are kind of remarkable pieces of almost investigative work, kind of disinterring of lost incidents. This is an unusually striking example.
It's really fascinating because Nandor Fodor, who's such a big character in the book, he says that supernatural occurrences are not caused by the shades of the dead, but by the unconscious minds of the living. And what can our unconscious minds do? We are obsessed with the conscious mind in our culture. There's nothing that causes more upsurge in activity in the unconscious mind than fear and terror, and the fear of not knowing when something is going to end, the fear of seeing how life is random, how it's completely, there's no logic to it.
I felt the eeriness of the story because people, who was I to say, these were people who were then living witnesses to supernatural events, and whatever my skepticism, I had to respect their impressions and beliefs and what they said they saw. So I had to sort of roll with it in order to think my way into that moment and to feel it as they felt it. So I didn't quite believe in ghosts, but I believed in the belief. And I think it would have been extremely strange and persuasive to be present in those seances, and indeed in that suburban house in Croydon where things were flying around apparently without any human or natural cause. So it was a definitely creepy material. And as the investigation went on, Fodor's investigation, I think that both he and Alma started to get really freaked out by the idea that a genuine possession might be going on, regardless of the trickery that had preceded it.
the reader of The Haunting of Alma Fielding is taken on in a remarkably unpredictable adventure. It seems like we're being told a ghost story, being taken into the world of the Society for Psychical Research, and that essentially it's going to be not really a whodunit, but what, if anything, is going on, and if nothing is going on, then what explains it. It's sort of mysterious happenings, poltergeists, random acts of violence. Instead, what Kate Summerscale reveals is that it's a whole society really that's haunted, and so she kind of smuggles a social picture into what seemed like a kind of an adventure story in a way, or a kind of eccentric kind of detective story.
The book tells us so much about the period. This story of Alma comes to explain, explore, excavate so much about the 1930s.
At his office in South Kensington on Monday, 21st of February 1938, Nandor Fodor opened a letter from an East End clergyman of his acquaintance. The Reverend Francis Nichol wanted to alert him to a poltergeist attack in the suburb of Thornton Heath, just south of London, which had been the subject of a report in that weekend's Sunday Pictorial. "I wonder whether you've seen it," wrote Nichol. "Unfortunately, the actual address is not given." The minister thought that the haunting sounded even more remarkable than a similar case in East London that he had helped Fodor to investigate that month. Fodor, a Jewish-Hungarian journalist, had for 4 years been chief ghost hunter at the International Institute for Psychical Research. He loved his job, which required him to investigate and verify weird events, but the spiritualist press had recently turned against him. The best-selling weekly Psychic News accused him of being cynical about the supernatural and unkind to mediums, charges that were so damaging to his reputation as a psychical researcher and his future in England that in January he had sued for libel. He was now desperate to prove his sincerity and his aptitude. He needed to find a ghost. Fodor obtained a copy of the latest pictorial. The paper had run the poltergeist story next to a giant cut-out photograph of Adolf Hitler, who was poised to invade Austria, so that the news of the haunting seemed to issue from the Führer's shouting mouth. "Ghost wrecks home," ran the headline. "Family terrorised."